All right, so if you're new with us, we are right in the middle of our summer sermon series on the parables of Jesus. And if you don't know, if you haven't realized this, so Jesus' parables in the Gospel of John sound a little different than the parables we find in the other Gospels. Now, why is that? Why are the Gospels so different? Why are the parables so different in the Gospel of John? Well, I have no idea. No idea why they're that way. I like what renowned theologian N.T. Wright says. He says, quote, "The Gospel of John is like my wife. I love her, but I do not always understand her." End quote. And so I'm totally with N.T. Wright. They're not exactly sure why Jesus' parables sound different in John, but they do. And so at any rate, I promise that what we are about to read is a parable. It is a parable. It just sounds a little different than the ones in the Synoptic Gospels. But it is a parable. And so today we are in John chapter 10. John chapter 10. And the parable really begins in verse 11 here. But Jesus sets up this parable, this story. So I'd like for us to read that part too. So we're actually going to start at verse 1. We're going to start at verse 1 and then we'll go all the way through verse 18. Okay? So this is John 10, verse 1 through 18. And if you don't have a Bible with you today, it's okay. The verses are on the screen behind me. So this is John chapter 10. This is Jesus speaking. And we will start with verse 1. "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them. And his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." Now here's the parable. "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father." This is God's word. All right, so as I said in the e-news this week, and by the way, if you don't subscribe to the e-news, it's easy to do. I send these out every Wednesday around lunchtime, and so you can subscribe to the e-news by going to goc.today and clicking on the e-news page. And so that's a good way for you to just kind of keep up with what's going on here at Gospel Life. And there's some other cool stuff we like to put in there. But one thing I mentioned in the e-news this week I think is incredibly important. It's that this parable, like all other parables, is centered around Jesus. Okay? Most of the parables today are badly misunderstood. Badly. They're badly preached, they're badly interpreted. And the reason is because we think that we are the main character of the parables. We think we're the main character and we're the main point of the parables. But Jesus disagrees. You see, because in the very few times Jesus actually explained or interpreted one of his own parables, we see this. We see that actually, in fact, Jesus is the primary point of the parable. He is the main character in the story. And so there are, obviously in every parable, there are sub-characters, and you and I are involved in a lot of those. We are sub-characters, there's sub-points. We're involved there, but we are not the main point. We're not the main character. And so you could call that the parable's key. The key to understanding the parables is to understand that Jesus is the main character. Jesus himself is the main point of the parables. And so, of course, this parable today is no different. We do have several characters in the story. We have a main character, we have sub-characters, and we'll go over all of those. But the main character here, my friends, is Jesus. This parable, along with all of the other parables, is about Christ, who he is and what he does. Okay? It's about him, who he is and what he does. All right, so knowing that, let's examine all of the characters in the story, shall we? Point number 1 in your outline, the sheep. The sheep. So in this story, who do the sheep represent? The sheep in this parable are Christians, okay? All Christians. These are all believers in Jesus. Now, I've heard this passage preached a whole bunch, and I've heard this taught on a whole bunch, and I think that every single sermon or teaching I've ever heard on this parable, the preacher claims that the reason Jesus compares us to sheep is that because we're stupid, just like sheep are. Okay? And I'll be honest with you, I have preached this parable before, and I have said that very thing. I've said that very thing. But I actually have come to think something a little different now about it. So now I'm not denying that sometimes we can be very, very dumb. Okay? I will raise my hand higher than anyone else's in the room. Okay? Very dumb. All right? I get that, okay? I get that we can be extremely stupid, but I actually don't think that's why Jesus compares us to sheep now. The harder I've looked at this parable, I don't think that's the reason he does it. And I say that because Jesus doesn't mention anything about stupidity in the text, right? So the sheep don't do anything dumb in the text. And so we want to be very careful, right? We want to do exegesis, not eisegesis, okay? So eisegesis is where I bring my own thoughts and view to the text. We don't want to do that. We actually want to do exegesis. We want to let Jesus' point exit out of the text and come to us. Okay? And so if you look at the story itself, the sheep don't do anything stupid in the story. And so I don't think that's actually the reason he compares us to sheep. So why then does he? Why does he compare you and me to sheep? Well, if you actually look at the story, it seems that for both sheep and Christians, our ears are very important. Our ears are very important. What we hear has the potential to comfort and unite us, or to scare us and divide us. Now, if you're familiar with the Gospels, you'll know that Jesus often says, after one of his teachings or his parables, he says, "He who has ears, let him hear." Jesus says this a lot. Why? Because our ears are very important. It's basically life or death. And it's exactly the same way with sheep and their shepherd. Sheep must have ears to hear the shepherd, or it's literally life or death for them. And it's the same way with you and I. Our ears are very, very, very important, and we'll see a little bit more on this in just a minute. But for right now, let's go to point number 2 in your outline. The second character we want to look at is the wolf. The wolf. So who is the wolf in the parable? Well, the wolf is God's enemy and our enemy, the devil. He is the devil. Now, what does the wolf do in this parable? Well, in the parable, he scares, divides, and scatters the sheep. Okay? Scares, divides, and scatters the sheep. But how does he do this? The parable isn't explicit, but in Revelation 12, we see there that this is actually one of the names of Satan. Revelation 12 calls Satan the accuser of the brethren. The accuser of the brethren. So if that's who he is, if that's what he does, if accusing is what he does, then what is the object of his attacks? Our ears. He is accusing us. He is speaking words into our ears. And so the object of his attack is our ears. And if he is the accuser, then what is he using to accuse us? Well, it has to be God's law. It has to be. God's moral law, which includes the Ten Commandments and every other moral command from God. And so what the wolf is doing is he is constantly pointing to the law and whispering in our ears, guilty, 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 guilty. You hypocrite. How dare you call yourself a Christian? You deserve nothing but punishment for your law breaking. And on and on and on. This is what he does to us 24/7. But here's a good question. Why does this scare us so badly? Why does this freak us out? Why don't we just blow him off? Why don't we just dismiss these accusations? Why does this scare, divide, and scatter us? It's because we know he's right. We know he's right. Though this is very hard to openly admit, we don't put it on Facebook or share it with folks here at church, but deep down, we know that we're lawbreakers. We know. We know we break God's law. And so the wolf's accusations, they come into our ears and then they go down and pierce our hearts. They hurt. Those accusations hurt. They pierce us because we know we're lawbreakers. We know he's right. And so these accusations fill us with fear and they scatter us away from our shepherd. But hey, wait a second. Wait a second. Aren't we supposed to have some people who are supposed to help us against the wolf? Well, yes, we are supposed to have some people to help us. They are the third character in the parable. Point number 3 in your outline. The hired hands. The hired hands. So the hired hands they are working the field and their job is to protect the sheep from the wolf. But sadly, they are far more concerned about themselves than they are the sheep. Now, who exactly are the hired hands in this parable? The hired hands in the parable are false preachers of God. They're false preachers. In fact, it's to them that this story is primarily directed. Look at verse 1 with me. Put verse 1 up there. This whole teaching, the setup and the parable, is primarily directed towards hired hands. Let's look at it. Verse 1, Jesus says, "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees." See that? So he's talking to self-righteous Pharisees here. "Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber." Now, what's all this thief and robber business? What is the other way that Jesus is referring to here? Well, since we know he's talking directly to Pharisees, well, we know exactly what he's referring to. Okay? We know how Pharisees, who are the religious leaders and teachers of Jesus' day, right? We know how they plan on getting into God's kingdom. And how is that? Through the law. Through their own obedience to the law. They are planning on getting into God's eternal kingdom through their own righteousness. Right? And so, very sadly, what false preachers are putting into the ears of the sheep is the exact same thing the wolf is. The law. It's the law. They're hammering the sheep with moral sermons, with moral lessons. Don't drink, smoke, or chew, or run with girls who do. It's moral lessons. It's law-based preaching. And there's a lot of problems with that kind of preaching. I'd like to give you 2 big ones, though, today. There's 2 enormous problems with law-based preaching. First problem. In Romans chapter 5 and chapter 7, Paul explicitly says that God's law causes sin to increase, not decrease. It causes sin to increase, not decrease. He goes on to say that the law causes death, not life. Causes death, not life. If you don't believe me, read it for yourself. Romans 5 and 7. Now, the law does that because that's exactly what God intended for it to do. It's exactly the intent of the law, the Ten Commandments, and any other moral command. It is meant to bring death, not life. Now you say, now, hey, wait a second, preacher. I thought the law was good. I've read all the scriptures that says the law is good, the law is good, the law is good. The law is good. The problem is you're not. Neither am I. The law is good. And has a very specific purpose. It's to bring death to us. Now you say, now wait a second. How could God's good law do that? How could the Ten Commandments bring death? Well, here's how. So, you either hear the law come into your ears, and A, you are condemned by it because you know you're not obeying it. Okay? So the law comes into your ears, and you immediately feel the condemnation of it. You feel the guilt of it. You feel the shame of it because you know you're not meeting the standard. Okay? So that's A. Option A. Or option B, the law comes into your ears and you are, hey, you're puffed up by it. You start pulling your arm out of socket, patting yourself on the old back. Why? Because you naively think you are obeying it. You're naive. And then, very ironically, you yourself become a hired hand. You become a self-righteous Pharisee. And those, friends, are the only two options the law gives us. That's the only options we have, right? The law either creates runaways or Pharisees and nothing else. That is all that it creates. Runaways or Pharisees. Just look at what the Ten Commandments did to the Israelites in Exodus 20. When Moses came down the mountain and read the commands to the people, Israel did not say, "Oh boy." They said, "Oh crap." And they ran away from the mountain of God. If you don't believe me, read it for yourself. Exodus 20, it's right there. So that's the first huge problem with law-based preaching, is that it actually creates death, not life. It causes sin to increase, not decrease. But here's the second huge problem with law-based preaching. Most of the time, it's not the real law. It's not the real law. It's a tremendously watered-down version. Okay? So the problem today in the American church is not watered-down gospel. It's watered-down law. That is the problem with the American church. So, for example, modern preachers, so instead of preaching the real law, instead of preaching love your neighbor equally as much as you love yourself, modern hired hands will say, be nice. Be nice. Be a good person. Give a little money to the poor. See? Another example. Instead of preaching, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength, modern hired hands will say, pray, read your Bible, and go to church. It's not the real law. It's a fake law. It's one they made up. It's a watered down version of the law. Now, why do hired hands do this? It's because the actual law of God is, in fact, impossible to obey. It is, in fact, impossible to follow. And so, in order to maintain our appearance of righteousness, we have to change it. We have to change it. We have to make the law conveniently look a lot like the lives we're currently living. So, how long should your quiet time be in the mornings? About as long as what I'm doing. 10 minutes is fine. That'll work. How much of the Bible should you read per year? Well, I get through about Leviticus, and then I call it quits. But I think that's good. That'll work. So how nice should you be to your neighbor? How much should you love them? Well, I wave at my neighbor, and we've had a couple of conversations. I think his name was Tommy, Billy, Sammy, something along those lines. But that's okay, yeah. About what I'm doing to my neighbor, I'm awfully friendly. I smile and wave. Because the law is so ridiculously impossible. It's so harsh, it's so difficult, we can't deal with it. So in order to maintain appearances, we have to water it down. We have to change what Jesus and Moses actually said to say something different. And all this does, my friends, is scare, divide, and scatter the sheep. It creates this tiered system, which was definitely in place in the first century. A tiered system of people on the top and people on the bottom. So the people that obey the watered-down law, they get to the top, and the people who we can say are not as holy, not as righteous, and not obeying as well as we are, we'll put them down at the bottom. And so when Jesus entered Jerusalem, what he saw was the Pharisees had put themselves at the top of the mountain, and they had quite literally put all the people of Israel at the bottom because they're not as holy and righteous. They're not obeying the fake law that we came up with. And so they're sinners. And so all this does is scare and divide the sheep. Now, what are we to do then? Since the hired hands are no help, and the wolf is scary, what are we to do? What is our defense against the wolf and the hired hands? Well, that brings us to our final point in your outline, the final character we will look at, the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd. So the wolf and the hired hands continuously put into our ears a condemning word. But thankfully, the shepherd has something to say to us too. And his words overshadow and overcome the words of the wolf and the hired hands. What is that word? What is the word the shepherd gives us? Look at verse 11. Look at verse 11. He says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And so, the word our shepherd puts into our ears is the word of the gospel. It's the word that says, I give my life to save you from the wolf. Though you are a lawbreaker, though you are guilty of sin, though you are deserving of punishment, I'm taking your punishment for you. I'm laying down my life for you. And through my broken body and my shed blood, all your sins are forgiven. And you are forever safe in my nail-scarred hands from the wolf. That, friends, is the word that goes into our ears from the shepherd. You see, the wolf and the hired hands, they only give you part of the story. They only give you half of it. And look, I'm not against law preaching. I've just given you a bunch of law. I'm not against it. I'm against law-only preaching. Right? So the law was intended to cause us to panic. That's the whole reason it was given to us. That is exactly its purpose. God gave us the law so that it would terrify us, so that it would reveal to us our true condition before our Creator. That is one of a sinner, a rebel. That is the purpose of the law. Paul writes this in Romans 3:20. Put this up for me, Jim. Romans 3:20. Paul says, no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of our sin. Do you see the explicit purpose of the law? It's to reveal your sin, to make you conscious of it. It is not in any way, shape, or form designed to make you righteous. It will not and cannot do that. That is not its purpose. But sadly, that is the only word we hear from the wolf and the hired hands. And if that's the only word we ever hear, we're in big trouble. Because if we just hear law, well, then we only have two choices. We either run away from our shepherd, or we become a self-righteous hired hand ourselves. And that's it. So as a teenager, I grew up in a church with law. And you know what I did? I ran. I hit that door so hard it made it spin. And it wasn't a spinny kind of door, you know. I hit that door so hard that it made it spin. I ran away and became a very hardened, enthusiastic atheist. Why? Because of the law. All I ever heard was law. Do right, act right, think right, be right. Do better, try harder. Don't drink, smoke, or chew, or run with girls who do. That caused me to hit the door. And when I came back, ironically enough, I had gotten myself in a lot of trouble. I'd done some really wild things, and I wanted to get my life right. Okay? Get my life right. So you know what I became when I came back through the door? A hired hand. I became a hired hand. I joined the chorus of do right, act right, be right, think right. I just joined the chorus. I went from a runaway to a Pharisee. But thankfully, thank God, somebody finally came along and gave me the word of the shepherd. Finally. I finally got it. You see, because friends, the law has never been the only word from God. Never. Yes, God did give Israel the word of the law to show them how sinful they were, but He also gave them the word of unconditional promise. Listen to this from the same book in Exodus. Check this out. This is from God's lips in Exodus 6. He says this, he says, quote, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring after you. Do you see? That's a different word. That's not the word of law. That's the word of promise. That's the word of gospel. That's what that is. You see? God is saying, when you keep the law, you're mine. And when you break the law, you're still mine. Because I have a covenant with you. I have an agreement with you to be your God and for you to be my people. And this, friends, this word is what you never hear from the wolf. You never hear this from the wolf. And you never hear this from hired hands. You never hear about an eternal, unconditional covenant of grace. You don't hear that. Hired hands say obey or else. Obey or else. You know, if you're not really obeying, if you're not really acting right, if you're not righteous, if you're not as holy as me, you're probably not even saved. That proves your baptism didn't work. I mean, you might not even be in this kingdom if you're acting so ugly. That's the kind of thing hired hands say. Now, don't misunderstand me here. Again, Jesus himself preaches the law. Okay, he's the greatest law preacher ever. But he never stops there. He never stops at the law. He doesn't put a period at the end of the law, he puts a comma. See? Jesus gives us the law so that we can see how incredibly far we fall short of its demands. But then our good shepherd gives us a completely different word. The word of promise, the word of forgiveness, the word of everlasting covenant. See? The word that says, wherever sin abounds, grace abounds more. The word that says, though you have not met the law's demands, I have met them for you. So when you keep the law, you're mine. And when you break the law, you're still mine. Because I have established an everlasting covenant with you. I have established it with my very own blood. That is the word of our shepherd. And it overcomes the words of the hired hands and the wolf. It's the word of the gospel. And so our ears are very important. What you hear, what you listen to is very, very important. It's life or death. In fact, if you notice, this parable actually shows us what faith is. It shows us what faith is, right? So faith trusts the shepherd and his words of promise and forgiveness. That's what faith is. And so, my friends, whenever the accusing words of the law enter your ears, that's fine. Let them do their job, okay? Let them cause you to panic. Let them reveal your sin. But then let them serve as reminders. See, don't put a period. Don't put a period once you hear them. Put a comma. Let those words remind you not to run away, but to run to your shepherd so that you can kneel at his nail-scarred feet and hear his tender word of forgiveness and find rest for your soul. It was Charles Spurgeon who said, when the devil comes to me and reminds me that I'm a sinner, I say, oh, thank you, devil, that warms my heart. Thank you for reminding me that Jesus died for sinners like me. The hymn writer put it like this. He says, O thou great, all gracious shepherd, shedding for us thy life's blood, unto shame and death delivered, all to bring us near to God. Now our willing hearts adore thee, now we taste thy dying love, while by faith we come before thee, faith which lifts our souls above.